retired. Ed Tennyson retired from several places.
Bob Covington, no MCD.
Dale Logan, MCD.
Paul Gilmore, LTD engineer.
William Thompson, I'm from OSHA, but I'm not here for them, I'm here for me.
Linda Sharma from Guns Engineering Consultants. Paul Conwood from Paul.
Steve Bezek from Birds Engineering and the treasurer.
Senior Kikuchi with Tech.
Pat Sullivan, MTSB.
Dave Chahowski, PHW.
Thomas Robertson, North Virginia Community College student.
Ed Lombardi, retired Amtrak.
Chuck Engelhard, retired Amtrak.
Frank Hughes, Westinghouse Air Brakes, retired.
Dick Fisher, FRA, retired.
Michael Giaquino, FRA, retired.
Jerry Gibson Hill's successors retired.
Oh, and I'd like to introduce Kathy Weiss, which is Belknap's daughter, and we're treating her today. So everyone give. I'm going to try to videotape this, so we'll try to minimize the distractions, but let's give it a shot. It's my very great pleasure to introduce today Belknap Freeman as our speaker. Belknap's been a faithful member of this organization from its earliest days back in the 70s. Travels here 150 plus rail miles to get to every meeting out of the Philadelphia area. Well, true, but he put in his time, let's face it, okay. And he brings to our meetings his unexcelled knowledge and experience in the railroad industry, which translates into penetrating and illuminating questions for our speaker, and I've been on the other side of that too. And I appreciate the kinds of questions that Belknap raises and the comments that he makes, because they're always pertinent and important to fleshing out the topic. I asked Belknap to give us a brief outline of his life, and I know he's going to do that, but I know he also has some technical topics that are of particular interest to him and the industry that he's going to talk about. So I'll make my biographical comments brief, since that will be part of his presentation. But I asked Belknap, I had the pleasure of having dinner as Belknap's guest last night, and I asked Belknap how he got interested in electrical engineering and the railroads. And there's a simple answer. He had Lionel trains when he was a kid.
Plus American Flyer.
Oh, good. I had American Flyer. All right. Well, one wonders if the toys and games that kids have today can lead to the same kind of interest in a lifelong career. I'm unfortunately skeptical that experience can be repeated. But his interest in electrical devices and railroads led him to get a Bachelor of Science Electrical Engineering degree at Carnegie Institute of Technology. We were joint alumni of Carnegie Tech. And but he couldn't get. He graduated in 1940, and Penn State was not hiring then, so he had to put in a year at a steel mill in Ohio, I think.
Waukegan, Illinois.
Illinois, okay, just as bad. And but a year later, he got a call from the Penn State, and the rest has been history. He's worked from a guy who dug pits for signal equipment to the chief of communications signal department, and made significant advancements to railroad signaling, particularly in electrified areas, and in electrification itself. In 1952, he stood for exam for the newly instituted professional engineering license in Pennsylvania and was granted license number 822. As I said, he's been a long-term member of this organization and has made financial donations to us in addition to the intellectual assets that he brings to our organization. He's also a member of the American Public Transit Association, National Society of Professional Engineers, Pennsylvania Society of Professional Engineers, the Delaware Association of Professional Engineers, and he serves quite actively on SEPTA's Community Advisory Committee. And I know this is not railroad related, but it's very special to him that he's been a long-term donor to the West End House Boys and Girls Club in Alston, Massachusetts. And this is an organization that Belknap's father was involved with more than a century ago. So I'd like us all to welcome Belknap for his presentation today.
First of all, I want to point out that I'm privileged to be here, and I appreciate the people who are here who put up with it. First of all, I have put together not a slide presentation that you could look at, forget, and walk out, but a printed epistle that has two functions. One, it does have a history of the open privileges I've had and the background that I existed in. And it also includes, from page 8 on, a very interesting issue, and that's continuous versus contention. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about the thinking today and attempting to reinvent the wheel, to try to provide fulfillment for the positive train control legislation that's out there that FRA is stuck with right now. And as we intend to move on, there's a very interesting issue. The issue of continuous and contention. In that background, to defend myself, I've been a member, incidentally, of various societies in respect to the people in this room from Westinghouse Air Brake. I've been a member of the Brake Association, Air Vehicular Association, for the last 35 years. So anybody who looks at the annual publication from the Brake organization, you'll find a listing of the personnel, and I happen to be in it. I pay my dues. Now, as to the IEEE, I used to have the privilege of being the president for a while, the IEEE's group in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And one thing I remember definitely out of that was that in introducing an individual, he pointed out that the president of the society had a problem. That was that he couldn't tell the difference between a bottle of beer and a beer in a bottle. And what he was referring to is the difference between the Army Engineer Corps and the Army Engineers per se. And that has stuck in my mind for a while. But what's very important is that during World War II, I had the privilege of being a company commander of a Signal Corps outfit that was designed, Air SIG, to support air bases with communications, repair, cryptographic rooms, so on and so forth. And from that, I got a very interesting background, a loyalty to people are working with, the talents that you have to associate with, as well as what the heck were we doing there in the first place? It was damn important, we felt, that if we had lost, our whole culture would have changed. And in conjunction with that, when I retired, I've seen my share of death, and it had a strong basis in my work thereafter in the railroad industry on the concept of fail-safe. I've seen two deaths in my railroad experience in recent years that have left an impression. One was a track watchman at an interlocking, DV to be exact, in Pittsburgh, where he was on a track, protecting a track, and along comes a train, but he didn't see there was a crossover in there, and the train coming crossed over, went right at him and killed him. And I'm standing there watching it happen. You get that impression. My second case that I believe in was at a station along the Pittsburgh territory where they had commuter service, and a man ran for a train. He slipped and fell. He fell between a low-level platform and the undercarriages of the oncoming trains, and that mangled him. And when you see that happen, you realize the importance of fail-safe. Now, from that, I put a handout out there which you can take with you, and it's got the history of my background, and under the circumstances, there's no point in trying to present it because it's long period of time and many things in it. So what is in print is only brief, but most of the privileges I've had are assignments on the old Pennsylvania Railroad and thereafter that allowed me to really have an impact. And one of them was the Pittsburgh Terminal Improvement Project, where we had a major interlocking built, which was a consolidation of 6, got 4 in it, and then the traffic disappeared. But along those lines, there were 63 slip switch layouts that we had to relocate. Some of the 8s we changed to 10s and so on and so forth. And over the years, I met up with Bob Herman, who was the train master, and told Bob Herman that I appreciated the amount of railroad he'd give me for different stages, and that he would take the blame for the delays, not blame it on the signal people. Well, with that, his answer was quick, that he gave me all the railroad I wanted because he wanted to get rid of me. So under those circumstances, that's been the life background. Now let's look at positive train control. Positive train control has caused an extension of the FRA's rules. And if we have anybody here from the FRA, I'll be only too glad that he take my epistle with him, and where I challenge the FRA, maybe I'll get an answer from him someday. But anyway, what's involved is that there was an addition, Section 8 to Part 236, and that addition actually introduced the concept of more electronic hardware, more radio, a lot of new ideas, and in line with reinventing the wheel. Now what happened in November of the year 2010, only a few months back, we have a new section in Part 236. It's Section I. What does it do? It takes that language from the legislation for PTC to be accomplished and supplies a myriad of procedures on filing what you're going to do to the manufacturer, to the railroad, how you're going to do it, and all the way through that section I, there's a word. The word is risks. And with the word of risks, they want you to tell them what are the risks of what you're doing. That's interesting. Why should we have it when we have technology that we've proven over the years that we look at and try to keep fail-safe? There's a difference. All right. One of the important things from history, over the years from about the mid-20s to be exact, we've had the concept of cab signals. Cab signals have been out there. They have been there with the word continuous. They operate turned on for the whole trip. The wayside is continuous. Therefore, for anything that happens, the engineman gets to know it pretty quick. Basically, about 2 to 3 seconds. Why the 2 to 3 seconds? Because the equipment is designed to straddle stagger of insulated joints. Out on the road, you normally limit the stagger of insulated joints by about 56 inches. The reason for that is that that's a few inches short of the spacing between the axles on a freight car. When you have a freight car going from one track sector to another, you don't want to lose it in the middle like we do at Fort Tottenham Metro. And in conjunction with that, what you get into is that if you put them too close together, then the track people are upset because then you destroy the elevation of the track if the two joints, which they consider a weak point, are too close. Okay, that's where the delay comes from. Now, where are we? We had a recent project. It ran for about 7 years. If you, depending upon what figures you're looking at, there was an expenditure of $109 million, and it represented an attempt to improve the speed between Chicago and St. Louis on the UP, and even then only 43% of the territory. And in conjunction with that, what did we do? In the days of the Clinton generation, we had a downgrade of the military infrastructure. There was an in-house policy that any government expenditure would give at least 40% of the expenditure to the military infrastructure to keep it going or keep it intact. What happened? On the project between Chicago and St. Louis, the prime contractor became Lockheed Martin, that 40% figure. They would not listen or cared about what was out there. They wanted to come through with a whole new idea. Well, they got into trouble. If something happened on the ground had to tell a central computer somewhere. The central computer had to log that. Then a train had to know where it was at, and it had to tell the computer where it's at, and then the computer would tell it by radio what its authority would be. Now, you had all these links going back and forth, many steps, and the deal was to have the locomotive have another process where it had a mind of its own, and if it didn't get a change or a repeat on its authority, it would then go into a braking mode and stop to protect whatever's going on because it didn't get any word. Fine. And the railroad industry wanted to move trains, not stop them all over the place. But the problem with the logic was that what do you do about the train behind it? And does that failure affect the train behind it? So is he going to come in and wrap you up? Well, the way it went, the state of Illinois finally said, hey guys, we've had enough, we're not going to cooperate anymore, forget it. The FRA, in their image, elected to hold the project together by sending Lockheed Martin out to Pueblo and said, hey, see if you can get that return process down to 23 seconds. Why they chose 23 is another issue. The people who were looking at this on the side had the attitude that, hey, we're going to go from minutes back to 23 seconds when we're operating out there at 2 or 3 seconds from the time something happens in front of a moving train to the engineman's attention. Okay. The project died. Now, here we are, Los Angeles. Los Angeles had a collision where in a CTC type of territory, the engineman on a local was texting on a telephone device wireless, and he got by a stop signal. That was supported by the fact that he ran through a switch. And under the circumstance, it doesn't come as a Union Pacific freight train against him, which is why he had a stop signal, which he ignored, and there was a collision, and obviously there were deaths. That, to me, plus Fort Taunton on Metro, is what instigated the knee-jerk reaction. We're going to have a positive train control law that all the railroads will comply with if they've got tonnage, if they've got passenger trains, if they've got hazardous materials. Okay, this is where we are today. Now Los Angeles is changing. They're dumping their operating organization for their suburban work, and lo and behold, they're proposing to have Amtrak do it for them. Well, that's Union Pacific territory. Now the question is, what are we going to do to provide a set of operation that will prevent that from happening again? We have the technology out there, but they don't want to use it. Now that takes me back. Let's talk about cab signals. There have been a lot of changes. You've had changes in, obviously, from vacuum tubes to solid-state technologies. You've had additional concepts such as code change points that other people don't even think about. And along those lines, all these changes have improved the operation. Now, what do we have out there? Well, a very interesting example of it that's isolated from my standpoint is the Patco line in New Jersey, which operates from Philadelphia out to a suburban area. And that's been operating now about 40 years. And what does it have? It has a conventional Union Switch and Signal Company cab signal package with speed control on MU cars. And they're operating, incidentally, with a 2.5-minute headway during rush hours. Okay, what do we have? The speed control goes to the traction motor circuits and provides the sense to the car's operation with a hands-free situation for the motorman. Once he closes the doors, the cab signal speed control goes to the traction circuits and off it goes. And then what it's doing is it also takes the civil speed restrictions and incorporates that into the cab signal system to slow the guy down where he's got to turn or whatever. The system has worked very well. I will concede the fact that the authority, though, has got more sense than other authorities, and they require their motormen to make one round trip a day manually. And under those circumstances, that keeps him in good shape. I know of only 2 major accidents on that Patco line, and that was going into a stub track at Ferry Street, which is partway out for turnarounds. And they managed to go into the stub track and hit the end. And that's happened elsewhere. Talking about one that just happened recently at Hoboken. Okay, that system still works well. Now, on the railroad industry, for example, the OPRR, we had a very, very tight culture, so that if there were a failure out on the wayside and the division didn't know, the division would be challenged by the region. If the region didn't know, it came to system. When it came to system, the old Pennsylvania Railroad had a committee followed by the name of Paul Early and myself and a transportation individual that had the job of investigating that failure and come up with an answer. I have a lot of respect for Paul. He was a damn good team worker. He knew his job. He had the MV department engine end of the cab signal world, and of course myself was out there on the ground. Along those lines, we got all the cooperation in the world from management to do anything we needed to replicate or try dry runs or whatever to ensure what we had. From that technology, that attitude is stuck through Penn Central, and in my own experience, that attitude still existed on the Amtrak Northeast Corridor. Now, let's go the other way. It's embarrassing to me to stand here and say that we had locomotives on Amtrak that were going cross country. Those locomotives were equipped with cab signals and speed control. What happened? For the last 35 years, any Amtrak locomotive that went west of the Mississippi River in alleged cab signal territory ended up having to defeat its speed control. Here we got a passenger train, we got speed control in the engine, and we can't use it in alleged cab signal territory. What did they run into? If it hasn't been removed, the last time I had my hands on a Western Region employee's book of rules, and you go through the signal aspects, at the end of that, there's a paragraph. And that paragraph is interesting. It says, cab signals are not applicable over switches. Scary. What have we had in recent years? We had a recent man in the signal department of Union Pacific, who's now retired, who spoke to a key person in the Northeast Corridor and Amtrak with a simple question. Hey, how do you guys bond switches so you can take cab signals through them? Not along straight, but along the turnout side. And to the best of my knowledge, nothing came out of it. What else do we have that's the problem? There are pieces like, say, the Chicago Northwestern, which is a nice system. It uses 100 hertz, it uses a code, but it's only got a problem. Only two aspects. It's either go or stop. Nothing in between. Okay. What else could you say about the Western roads? The fact that without switches, you've wiped out all the interlockings and anything they provide. Then what you get into, use of 60 hertz in some of their alleged territories, and I have a real problem with 60 hertz because I've had too many failures relating to interference from commercial systems parallel with the railroad into the signal system. Okay, now let's go back the other way. Let's take the Northeast Corridor. For anybody who's really interested, the Acela trains actually have a 9-aspect cab signal. The 9-aspect cab signal gives the engineman a signal possibility to authorize 150 miles an hour. What is it doing? It's getting an indication from the very track that he's operating on that's telling him that he has not one clear, but additional clears necessary to give him adequate braking distance at that speed. Now, this guy is so arranged that he, in his 9-aspect cab signal, has 100 hertz for his basic cab signal, and for the rest of the trains that are out there with 4-aspect displays and speed control being governed by the existing wayside signals. And then along comes the Acela train with 9 aspects, which gives them aspects for high-speed crossovers, aspects for 150 miles an hour, but he's getting it from not 100 hertz, but 250 hertz. So he sees 2 frequencies. How do you get the 250 hertz out there? You get it out there during the off time of the code at 100 hertz. So it could be 100 hertz, 250 hertz. And the solar train sees both. And therefore, you have all those openings in the 100 hertz network to put in the intermediate 250, whether it's 120 code, 180 code, or whatever. Now, where did that come from? That was developed back in the 1960s to the extent of there being patent rights established. And a chap by the name of Reeves and another chap by the name of Freeman are the two people who developed the patent rights and the concepts for that continuous operation, and sold it to the Union Electricity Signal Company with our management's authority for another reason. We were getting the Metroliner program for high-speed vehicles developed under the auspices of the Department of Commerce. And in those days, there was no FRA. There was the Interstate Commerce Commission that had the signal rules. Okay, we were being badgered by European firms coming to the top management of the Pennsylvania Railroad with their ideas, and then people on the bottom of the deck had to beat it off. And that's why Greaves and myself came up with the concept of the 9-aspect signal, cab signal, which is in service today for the last 10 years. It was an interesting issue. We hear in reinventing the wheel and putting a central computer in it, oh, we're going to get a floating block advantage. Well, I got news for people. We've got the floating block out there right now because we've been running trains for over 10 years with 9-aspect cab signals, 4-aspect cab signals, legitimate speeds, very high speeds, and they're all intermingled and they're out there together, to include freight trains, by the way. Well, what does this mean? It works. And we've got these examples that are giving vehicles 2.5 million, as you will, 2.5 minutes headway. And I offer an example in this talk. Matters is a piece of Amtrak that has 6 tracks between Norway and Elizabeth. And with the 6 tracks, you can simultaneously have 4 trains running side by each, all for the same throat, where you're going from 6 to 4. Now, what happens is the waysides play a part in this. I've ridden trains on that 4-track section repeatedly with the engineman. And what's happening is the engine moves along and he's seeing the waysides. So he knows what the other tracks are doing. And he knows whether he has a window in advance to get to Elizabeth to merge from 6 to 4. And he knows what's going on with the trains beside him. Who's got the way to go. Now, he's got maybe 14 cars of computers. And there are a lot of people that do that every day. You don't want to go somewhere and then stop and have everybody wonder, now what's happened, and am I going to be late to work? But if you can drift, fine. So you're coming along in parallel trains from New Brunswick, trains from Trenton, trains from the Perth Amboy section, and Amtrak's trains, all mixed together. And under the circumstances, you're trying to get them all through that throat without delaying any of them. Okay. You don't want to keep speeding, you can't stop if you don't have the railroad, but you can at least drift, and then your commuters won't worry about whether you're goofing off or not. And under those circumstances, it didn't matter whether you had a GG1, whether you had an MU or whatever. The engineman was invariably looking at not only his waysides, but also those on other tracks, particularly the distance signals for Elizabeth, to know who has a window. Then if he's drifting and he's still able to stop, then if he gets the window open for him, now he can widen it out and keep going. If you've got a train that's stopped at an interlocking and you give him a signal when he stopped, you're going to lose a lot of time just for him starting up and accelerating. But if he's drifting, he just scoots through. Well, that type of example is such that you absolutely cannot apply any of the technology that's being attempted today to reinvent the wheel. The problem I have with reinventing the wheel in today's technology, particularly the Western roads, is the fact that you're splitting responsibility. There isn't one man who's working on that engine and with a lock cabinet and signing off what he did, and whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. But you've got a man responsible, and he knows it. Today, you've got so many steps that you've diluted the responsibility. Now, if you've diluted the responsibility and something happens, just try to find out who did what. Okay. The second problem today is that which you see that's been out there for years and years and years and that operates is fail-safe is the best we know how. And some of us have seen death enough to respect that and do our damnedest to make sure that's the way it is. And if you have the love metal and you have the very track it's operating on, you've cut it down to only 1 or 2 interfaces. All right? Let me sneak in some of my Air Force background. In my Air Force background, I've been on a paid status for many years as a reservist with the Air Force Communications Command at a fairly high level. And in conjunction with that, there have been times when I've had the fun of calling them up ahead of time, hey, I'm going to come on active duty for a couple of weeks. What's your problem these days? And I'll come prepared to make a response. That was fun, but it was also educational. And under those circumstances, the one thing I got out of that that applies here is the fact that on any test of service in the military, particularly the Air Force, you want to judge how long you've got to test it. Where does that judgment come from? The judgment comes from the very issue, what is your parts population of every single step? And then look at the failure possibilities of that total parts population to determine what you're going to put out there as a test performance requirement and the duration thereof. Today, with the technology we're trying to develop, we've thrown in communication links that we try to make fail-safe because they have to be to make the system halfway decent. What do you do today in the East? You don't worry about the communication links between A and B because they're not fail-safe. The fail-safe is on the vehicle and on the wayside, distributed. Between that and your central source, not fail-safe, and it doesn't need to be. All right. You have other similar problems. I happen to be a stockholder of the Union Pacific. I've only got a little over 1,000 shares, so I've been interested financially. What the hell are they doing? So the stockholders' reports last year came back and said, we can't afford to do all these things for positive train control because the cost is exceeding the economic return from the piece of road that they're trying to force us to apply. That's an interesting issue. And in conjunction with that, guess what? They don't have a choice today. Now, today in PTC, the Western roads are still fussing around to try to meet the requirements of the FRA. Now, let's look at the FRA. Let's go back to that basic term, continuous and contention. There's a rule in 236.511, which happens to be reference to cab signals on equipment, on wheels. And it includes the word continuous. Now, FRA puts a docket out there to give relief to projects like that St. Louis and to the Burlington Northern and the Union Pacific, to give them relief from their own rules to go out in that program attempting to redesign and reinvent the wheel. What happened? There are two dockets from the FRA that gave relief to the road involved by taking Rule 236.511 and paraphrased it. When they paraphrased it, they gave the railroad a waiver from the paraphrased rule of 211. And in doing that, they left out the concept of continuous. All right, in my rebuttal that I've handed you, I have pointed out the fact maybe the FRA was giving relief from the sense of 511, but they were preserving for themselves the issue of continuous, because the moment they paraphrased and left it out, and they gave a railroad relief to waive the requirements of Rule 236.511, they were ducking the issue and covering themselves, from my standpoint. I responded to those dockets formally, and they're a matter of record with the Department of Transportation's file system. In conjunction with that, I never got a response out of the FRA, the fact that I nagged the issue not once, but twice. Two dockets that they issued giving relief to railroads had that same problem of paraphrasing the rule, which from where I said was the heart of having 2.5 seconds to give you attention of what's going on, because that's the only way it's going to work. You can't poll locomotives, talk to this guy, then talk to that guy. But Part 11 does a good job. Part 11 knows there are hackers out there. So under those circumstances, they have put in a requirement that you will, in addition, take your orders on your radio links and codify them, to put a code in instead of clear text to tell them which end is up. Okay, that's easy to copy as anything else, and there are other ways in handling cryptographic intelligence where you change the text so that if you take the text and compare it with the code, you can't use the match to identify how the system works. So if you change the text but don't lose the sense, then when you code it, you can't match it. That's the way we used to handle them in World War II, both ways. Okay, these are more steps in whatever you do between the ground, the central computer, and the word back to the locomotive. It's more delay while that guy's still moving. If he's doing 60, 90 miles an hour, and you're talking about minutes before you tell him that you've had a disaster in front of you, forget it. There are people like myself who have backgrounds of trains like the old Broadway Limited having derailed at Lewistown, and in having derailed at Lewistown, he got the track circuit screwed up, and that was during the night when you had all these other trains. They all had protection from the signal system spreading out the fact that, hey, things have gone wrong. People here Like Tyson, for example, might remember the derailment of a freight train near Paoli, where the locomotive derailed, and a passenger train came along, lost its cab signals, and attempted to break his speed, and came up to the wreck and just touched it, and then there was forced him off the track. But it could have killed everybody. So it's a case where something happens in front of you, you want the system to be able to respond. All right, big problem. In that material, I have a case where the FRA had, under the 4R Act, and the creation of the Northeast Corridor, with $6 billion for the project in the beginning, they had the authority to oversee that. So FRA got into the habit of micromanaging the project, and the management didn't attempt to oppose them because of the fact that if they opposed them, that they might upset something else that they wanted to do. Okay. There was a request to eliminate all the intermediate wayside signals. That came from the FRA to an engineering organization, not the railroad, for the engineering organization to prepare an application to the FRA to do that very thing. There was a public hearing. Okay. At the public hearing, who showed up? Surprise. The top officers of the Enginemen's Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers Union from Cleveland. They made a pitch at that hearing as to the fact this wasn't a bright idea and why you want to keep the intermediates. I'm at that meeting. The Northeast Corridor had an attorney at that meeting. The attorney is deceased now, so I used his name anyway in this report you have, Scott Armentrout. And Scott Armentrout walked up to me and said, that was a very interesting publication that the engineers presented, which killed the idea and destroyed its rationale. And the project died right then and there. Then he said, you know, how did you get that to him? And my answer was, how do you know I wrote it? And he came right back to me and told me, I recognized your way of presenting something.
Yeah.
So you've got situations like that that have happened over the years that, from my standpoint, there have been about 4 times I actually opposed my own management and made a point, risking the idea that, hey, I'm probably going to be fired. Well, in that write-up, it has another one of those issues. There was a change when we went from inductive train phone to radio, to VHF. We asked for an advertisement for about 2,400 VHF radios for all our locomotives that were equipped with an inductive type of telephone and the towers along the way. And lo and behold, their bid came in, and the bid came to my desk, and I refused to approve it. The technology was all wrong. And I made a suggestion, this is what you got to do to fix it. They went to see our Vice President of Operations with their staff out of Chicago, saying, you've got a second-class guy down there who's not working. We've got to do something about this. So, for reasons unknown, that Vice President left me alone and suggested they look at what I suggested what they ought to do. A year later, they came back with a revised bid, and we approved it. and that's out there today. What did the vice president do? He assigned a man who was a civil engineer, and he was in the industrial engineering department, and he assigned him to follow me around to see if I knew what I was doing. I'm not going to mention his name because he's still alive. So anyway, along that lines, he was a pain in the neck. So along these lines, there are things once in a while that our operating people maybe don't like, but they might be able to listen. So in that material that I left in that bulletin, there's a case where some of the things I was involved with in the sign, management along the line was skeptical. So the message would go along, Mr. Freeman, who we have assigned to this project, reports that, which took them out of the middle. And that happened more often than once. There's another little item that's in there. I had a general manager of, at one time, of the Northeast Corridor, and he fired 5 people, period, because he didn't like what they were doing. So Scott Armentrout comes to me, and he says that, hey, what you are faced with, you must realize that Mr. So-and-so was going to fire you too. But he made the comment, I'm afraid to, because I'm afraid it'll go public. So you realize I had a lot of fun. And there was a lot out there. But I'm very serious. We have a couple of people here from the FRA. If they want to talk to their own people, I would suggest that they answer some of the dockets I filed, especially the fact of their attempting to hide the word continuous from their waivers to railroads for Rule 236.511. Beyond that, as I see it, I've overrun my time, and I'll leave this open for questions if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, I have a couple of, I'm not probably as well acquainted with railroad engineering as some of your other people, so if you could probably define some of the things. Code change points, and then we have 9 or 6 aspects, cap signals. I don't know what that means. Yeah, can you?
The problem is 9 and 4, and the conventional equipment in the industry is a clear, an approach medium, an approach and restricting. And that's the 4. Except on the Union Pacific where you've got miles and miles of railroad, but only 2, go and stop. So then on the 9, you get additional high-speed aspects, including intelligence for speeds over long crossovers, plus the top speeds like 150.
Okay, and code change points?
Code change points, you can go along today and you can have an approach signal. An approach signal in the cab says proceed to stop, be prepared to stop, proceed at medium speed, prepared to stop at the next signal. So what you do is about 1,000 feet before he gets to that next signal, the wayside says that if that signal is less favorable than slow approach, say it's stop and proceed or stop or restricting, it 1,000 feet away from the interlocking takes away the code in the track and takes away that approach aspect that that engine has that tells him to be prepared to stop, and takes it away ahead of time and drops it to restricting on the locomotive so that he knows damn well that he's speed control's going to make sure he's down to 15 miles an hour approaching that signal that doesn't allow him to go anywhere.
Okay. Just one last definition. interlocking and switches, are they the same thing, or?
They're basically the same thing. You can have switches out there that go to industrial sidings or something like that. In CTC territory, for example, they'd have electric locks on them and on and on and on. However, they're just as important as an interlocking. So if you have a railroad at least once a year, you'd go out there with a locomotive and then approach that hand-operated switch that's out there to an industry, and then if that switch is not locked up and in the right position, you lose the cab signal. So that switch in signal territory also reaches back, when you have cab signals, to knock down the locomotive's cab signals approaching that switch. And you check it annually to know that it works. Now in the interlocking, it's a different story. Those routes in an interlocking are extremely important because you stand the risk of an overrun by somebody on another track. If you have a train on another track that violates a stop signal and gets in the interlocking, it'll take away the cab signal from the guy that's going through there or approaching it, where the cab signals carry his route all the way through, to include where he's going next. And under those circumstances, it's very important because of the fact that on roads like the old Pennsylvania, and adapted by people like Amtrak, you will find that in an interlocking, as of right now, with no trains in the interlocking, there's no cab signal energy. And if there's a route set for an engineman, then the cab signals in the interlocking come on only when the train it was intended for gets into the interlocking and shunts the first track second. That will pick up what we call a V relay and put the code on the track, and that's the first time the locomotive gets any intelligence in the interlocking per se. We think so much of an interlocking that we keep the interlocking with no cab signal energy at all, and then turn on only when the train arrives for who it's intended.
Right, we have time for just one more question. Chuck?
I think, Belknap, you talked about all the victories you had with the management at the Pennsylvania Railroad. Can you tell us if the people aren't dead now or if they're alive who sent you up to Buffalo?
When I was going up to Buffalo, I went up there for a construction job, the Kinsler Dam job, and also the signal tracking from Harrisburg to Buffalo. But wherever I went, for example, in Buffalo, I needed a signal supervisor for the Chautauqua branch. So guess who I pulled up there? Bob Robecker, who I had at Pitt, who used to be a maintainer, who I had as an assistant supervisor, brought him up there as the supervisor for that project. And the only thing he did was that when we had the cutover, we had the freight service abandoned for the day to make a cutover and break down everything, check everything. And I had a locomotive as a test agent to wander back and forth. And the only problem was Rebecca got sick and was hospitalized, and yours truly had to go to work and run the cutover.
I thought maybe it was a punishment.
Yeah.
Well, there were a lot of things going on. There's a lot I left out of that. I could have taken a week loan, and I only had a short period of time here, and that would be not 10 pages, but 40 pages.
All right. Well, let's all thank Belknap for. Belknap, you know that we give our speakers a certificate, and pleased to hand you this one from the IEEE ASME Vehicular Technology Society, National Capital Land Transportation Committee. This is a certificate of appreciation for all the contributions you've made to railroad technology. So,
good job.
All right, that will be the last presentation in this series. We restart September 13th in the fall, and hope to see you all then. Thank you. Okay, I forget.